10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast, episode 243. Hey everybody, welcome back to episode 243 of the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast. Hope you are all doing well out there and your 2021 is going in the right direction so far. Really excited to get our first regular episode off the ground here. And we're going to start a new series this month. We're going to try to do some different things in 2021, shake things up a little bit, try some new angles, some new topics, and learn from you what you would like to hear on this show in 2021. I'm going to be doing some deep dives on some certain jazz players that I think have a lot to offer through analysis of their playing. And I'm going to give you a lot more assignments in 2021. I think this is going to be the year of me really assigning you something kind of specific every single week here on the podcast to give your practicing some definite direction and give you something to do when you sit down. So we're going to get into that shortly, but first I want to thank our brand new patrons for the first week of 2021. And if you're not sure what I'm talking about, this is how listeners support this show and make sure that it keeps coming out each and every week in high quality. And you get some really fantastic rewards for supporting the show with either $3 or $5 a month. And you can do that and learn more about it by going to 10minutejazzlesson.com, clicking on one of the Patreon links and getting yourself signed up today. And everything will be explained on that page in terms of what you get. So I've got to thank some brand new people. Thank you to our new $3 patrons, Ronald, LA, Hive Talk, and I want to also thank some new $5 patrons. Thank you to Stefan, Andreas, and Philip. And I also want to thank Colin for editing their pledge from $3 to $5 to get those extra rewards at the $5 tier. So again, if you want to check out what you get in return for a small donation every single month, in addition to keeping the podcast going, go to 10minutejazzlesson.com, click on one of the Patreon banners, get yourself signed up today, and you get instant access to all 243 episodes that we've done so far in the show. All right, so let's jump into today's topic. I'm really excited about it. This month, we're going to do a deep dive on the playing of Charlie Parker. And what we're going to do is we're going to take three different aspects of his playing, and we're going to find some examples, and I'm going to give you an assignment to try to use some of these characteristics in your own playing and your own practicing. And I think particularly with Charlie Parker, this is really, really going to be a huge help to a lot of you out there. By harnessing the power of some of these simple devices that he uses, but really forcing yourself to explore how they work and be able to recreate them, you are going to gain just tremendous direction in your playing and start to develop some of these really typical bebop devices that he's using. Now, the reason that I chose Charlie Parker is he is, after all, the architect of bebop. He's the one that really popularized some of these devices and in many cases really was the first person that started using them. Now, all of these things that I'm going to be talking about, they have been used before, but Charlie Parker just started using them in such a way that they became really important aspects of soloing. And the other thing we have to remember about bebop is that any jazz that we listen to that came after bebop was influenced by bebop and Charlie Parker. And there's really no getting around that. That really makes him one of the most important musicians that's ever lived, because we can't help but be informed by his music no matter what style we're going for, genre of subset of jazz that we are trying to play. It's all been influenced by the bebop language. And these aspects of his playing that we're going to uncover and study are really just essential for any musician. Not even just a jazz musician, any musician, period, should study some of these things that we're talking about. So really take these things seriously and do the exercises. And I think that you'll really see your playing start to change. So what we're going to talk about in the first one is the fact that Charlie Parker loves to use chromatic approaches to strong beats and new chords. So if you think about it in the bebop language or in the jazz language in general, generally chords change on strong beats. So that means either beat 1 or beat 3. Now, we've talked about this topic before, but we're really going to drill down on it in today's episode, and we're going to use Charlie Parker's playing as our model to go off of. So let's dive straight into the examples that I've prepared for you this week. You can find these on the PDF. If you have them, follow along with me because you can really go through, and I've color-coded a lot of the notes so you could see exactly where these half-step transitions come in, and you can sort of look at them on paper in the context of the line. So we're going to start with a very, very simple line. It's just a short 2-5-1 in the key of concert G minor, and we're going to look at two spots where he uses this half-step approach into a chord tone on the strong beat. So first, let's listen to the line at a really, really slow tempo, and then we'll talk about what's going on with it. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so you can hear that's a very, very simple line. It's a very short line, but it's going to cover the topic that we're talking about. So if you look at the transition from the and of 2 into beat 3, what you will notice is he's playing the 7th of the 2 chord, and that goes into the 3rd of the 5 chord. It's going down by a half step, and that gives it this really, really slick sound with great voice leading. He doesn't break the direction of the line. It's just a very smooth transition from one chord to another. Now, we see this again on the and of 4 going into beat 1 of the 1 chord. He does the major 7th of the 5 chord resolving to the 5th of the 1 chord, and it's going up now. So another half step resolution, but this time going up. And this is really vital in the bebop style, using half step resolutions on strong beats of the measure, usually going from chord to chord, but it doesn't always have to be going from chord to chord. Sometimes he'll use half step movement going into a strong beat when he's staying on the same chord, but we're going to be studying, especially in this first line, when it changes chords. So really listen to these lines again. I'm going to play it 3 more times, and I want you to listen for the and of 2 going into 3 and the and of 4 going into 1. And that's where we're going to see all of these things happen in all 3 examples that we talk about today is going to be the and pushing into a strong beat and using half-step motion there. So here's this line 3 more times. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, so you can hear how much direction that gives to the line and how smooth the transition from chord to chord is, and that's what we're really going for. So let's dive into our second example, and this one is a pretty simple chord progression as well. It's 1, 2, 5, 1, and then it ends on a 6 chord. And this is all in the key of concert B flat. So let's check out what this one sounds like really slowly. Then we'll talk about it for a second, and then we'll listen to it again. 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, so let's check out what's actually going on with this. Again, the PDF is color-coded. So if you look at the and of 2 in the first measure, he's using a chromatic approach to the 3rd of the 1 chord. Now, if we look at second measure from the ah of 2 into beat 3, he's using a half-step approach to the root of the 5 chord. And then if you look at the last note of the triplets going into the final measure, now he's using a chromatic approach to the root of the 3rd measure of the line. So in this really short 3-measure line, we actually see 3 instances of a half-step approach to the strong beat. And we also see a nice variety of approaches going up and approaches going down. They actually sort of switch back and forth. All right, so let's listen to this line again. We're gonna do it at 3 different tempos and really listen to those spots on the PDF that I have marked in red. Those are the half-step approaches that I am talking about. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. You know, it's amazing how fresh his playing sounds 50, 60, 70 years later. It just still gets me every time. He's just so amazing. The playing never loses its luster. So you can really hear those half-step approaches in this particular one. Now let's move on to the 3rd and final example. Let's give it a listen, and then we'll chat for a second. 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, so you can hear that this one is a little bit more complicated of a progression. What it does is it starts concert A flat minor 7, and then it does this descending motion, goes from concert E flat 7 down to concert D flat 7 down to concert C7, and then moves around the circle of fourths to concert F7. So much more of an interesting progression, a little bit longer of an example, but we could see that he's still using a ton of these chromatic approaches. So let's take a peek at where he's using them in this particular line. So if we look at the 1st measure going into the 2nd measure, on the and of 4, he's using a chromatic approach to the 5th going up. Then if we look at, now this one is actually interesting. So the end of the 2nd measure going into the 3rd measure is actually using the chromatic approach on the and of 4, and that's called an anticipation. So he's landing on the note that he wants a half a beat early, and this is something that's really, really common in the playing of Charlie Parker and therefore in the playing of everybody that came after Charlie Parker. But what he's doing is on beat 4, he's using a chromatic approach to the root of the next chord, which he lands on the and of 4. So he's going a half step above the root down to the root. And then if we look at the of 2 in the 3rd measure, he's using a chromatic approach going down to the 3rd of the chord. And then finally, the and of 4 moving into the downbeat of the last measure of the line, he's using a chromatic approach going down to the 5th. So in this one, we see 1 chromatic approach going up and 3 going down. But this line is really interesting because they're packed in pretty tight. He's really, really leaning on this particular topic that we were talking about today, which is why I think this is a perfect example. All right, let's listen to this line 3 times, slowly moving up in tempo. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. That one is probably my favorite line out of all the ones that we looked at today. I just love the way that sounds. Okay, so really study those. Study the PDF, look at the highlighted notes, figure out what he's doing, maybe write down some of the different approaches that he's using. And then your homework for this week is I want you to write 3 lines over whatever chord progression you want. If you don't know what to do it over, just use a 2-5-1. That's a great place to start. But you could, use the tune, whatever tune you're studying at the moment, and you could pick a certain place in there and write out your own lines over it. But what I want you to do is I want you to use these examples as inspiration and try to always land on a chord tone on the strong beats and use a chromatic approach, either coming from below or coming from above. Now, the act of sitting down and writing these and having to really think creatively using this particular topic is going to be really good for you. Now, remember, you have to get the PDF in order to study what Charlie Parker has done. So remember, you can do that by going to 10minutejazzlesson.com, clicking on one of the Patreon banners, and getting yourself signed up today to get instant access to the PDF that we used for this episode. Let me know if you have any questions. A great place to ask those is in the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson Community Facebook group. And also, that's a great place to actually post your lines. Post yourself playing them, post an image of your lines. A lot of people have been doing that, and myself and the members over there love it when we can all get involved with that. So this episode went on for a very long time, and I do apologize for that, but we had to get all that information in there. Hope you are all doing really well. I hope you have a great weekend, and I hope your 2021 is treating you all right to this point. Have a good one, everybody, and we will talk to you next week with a brand new episode. Bye.